What would you do if you saw a woman collapsed on the side of the road in the middle of a February night in Edmonton? Not obviously hurt. Just sitting there on the curb outside a Tim Hortons, coat too thin for -20, a garbage bag of belongings at her feet, staring at the ground like she was trying to remember something she'd lost a long time ago. Would you keep driving? Most people would. Most people did. Clifton Adeyemi did not. He'd been on his way home from a 12-hour shift at the garage, hands still smelling faintly of motor oil despite washing them twice in the shop bathroom. He had a 10-year-old daughter waiting at home with his mother, a rent payment due in 4 days, and exactly the kind of exhaustion that makes a man stare straight ahead and tell himself someone else will handle it. And yet, he pulled over. He didn't know why, not exactly. He told himself later it was the coat. Nobody should be outside in a coat like that in February in Alberta. But if he was being honest with himself, and Clifton was usually the kind of man who tried to be honest with himself, it was something else. It was the way she wasn't asking for anything. No sign, no outstretched hand, just sitting there like she'd already decided she didn't deserve to ask. He got out of the truck and walked over slowly, the way you approach someone who might startle. "Ma'am, you doing okay?" She looked up. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, though the cold and whatever she'd been through had added years to her face that didn't really belong there. Dark eyes, sharp despite everything. She didn't look confused or gone the way some people on the street looked. She looked like someone who had once known exactly where she was going and had simply at some point stopped being able to get there. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady, almost formal. "You don't look fine," Clifton said. "And I mean that with respect. It's -22 and your jacket isn't rated for this." She didn't answer right away. She looked at him the way people look at something they're deciding whether to trust. "I was going to go in," she said, nodding toward the Tim Hortons. "But I don't have any money on me. I'll get you something. Come on inside." She hesitated. He could see it, not reluctance exactly, more like she was running some kind of internal calculation he wasn't privy to. "I don't need charity," she said. "It's a medium double-double and a soup," Clifton said. "It's not charity. It's a Tuesday." Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, exactly, but close. Inside, under the fluorescent lights, she looked even more out of place and yet somehow more real. Her name was Genevieve Umont. She said it the way people say a name they haven't used out loud in a while. He didn't ask for her last name. She offered it, almost like she was handing over a piece of ID. She wrapped both hands around the soup cup and didn't speak for a bit. Clifton sat across from her and drank his coffee and didn't push. He had a daughter at home, but he had a few minutes. The least he could do was give her a few minutes. "I had a motel on Stony Plain Road," she said eventually. "But they gave away my room. I'd been in the hospital for 4 days. I didn't know they'd do that." "Were you sick?" "I fell," she said. "And then I've been falling for a while." Clifton looked at her for a long moment. His mother always said he had a soft heart in a hard world, and that the combination would either make him a good man or a broke one. Probably both. She wasn't wrong. "There's a couch at my place," he said. "My mom's there, my daughter. It's not much, but it's warm." Genevieve stared at him. "You don't know me." "No," he said, "but you're not going to hurt anybody. And it's -22. You do this often? Bring strangers home?" "First time," he said honestly. She slept on the fold-out couch in the living room, under 2 blankets his mother brought out without being asked. His mother, Celestine, who had come up from Trinidad 30 years ago and had very particular opinions about most things, looked at Genevieve, looked at Clifton, and said nothing except, "I'll make eggs in the morning," which was, from Celestine, practically a declaration of welcome. His daughter, Imani, was 9. She peered around the hallway door with enormous curiosity, was told it was late, and retreated. But the next morning she sat across from Genevieve at the kitchen table with the particular intensity of a child who has decided someone is interesting and asked her 17 questions before Celestine told her to let the woman eat her breakfast. Genevieve answered every question, patiently, carefully. She asked Imani questions back. What grade was she in? What was her favorite subject? Did she like hockey or find it confusing? Imani said she found it confusing, and Genevieve said, "Seriously, that's the correct opinion. Most people just don't admit it." Imani laughed. Celestine raised an eyebrow in a way that meant she approved. Genevieve stayed 3 days. She helped with dishes. She fixed a loose hinge on the cabinet door that Clifton had been meaning to get to for 4 months. She was quiet in the mornings and more talkative by evening, which Clifton recognized as the pattern of someone who needed time to trust the space they were in before they'd open up in it. On the second evening, she asked Clifton about the garage. He told her, 14 years as a mechanic, the last 3 as the lead tech at an independent shop on 118th. The owner, a man named Fowler, had been talking about retiring. There'd been some loose conversation about Clifton buying him out, taking over the lease. But the numbers were hard. Clifton had some savings, but not enough, and the banks were the banks. Genevieve listened. She asked precise questions about the lease terms, the equipment inventory, the client base, the average monthly revenue. She wasn't making small talk. She was actually listening. "You have a head for business," Clifton said. "I used to," she said simply, and didn't explain further. He didn't push. He'd learned not to push. On the third day, she said she had somewhere to go. She said it like she'd made a decision, not like she was leaving because things had gotten uncomfortable. She thanked Celestine first, then Imani, then Clifton. She shook his hand. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said. "I know," he said. She picked up her garbage bag. Then she stopped at the door and turned around. "What's the name of the garage?" "Adeyemi Auto," he said. "I named it before I owned it. Kept me motivated." She smiled at that, the first real one he'd seen. "Keep the name," she said. "It suits you." And then she was gone. Life went back to its regular shape. Clifton worked. Imani went to school. Celestine ran the household with the precision of a woman who'd been doing it since long before anyone thought to thank her. The Fowler conversation happened twice more and then stalled the way those conversations do when the money doesn't quite line up and nobody wants to say so out loud. Clifton stopped bringing it up. 2 weeks after Genevieve left, a letter arrived at the garage addressed to him. Not a bill, not junk mail. A proper letter in an envelope with a law firm's return address on the upper left corner. The firm was called Omont and Pelletier. He didn't register it at first, and the letter informed him that a trust account had been established in his name in the amount sufficient to purchase the commercial lease and full equipment inventory of the property at the 118th Avenue address, should he choose to proceed. He read it 3 times. Then he called the number on the letterhead. The lawyer who answered, a very composed woman named Dorothy, confirmed that yes, the arrangement was real, and yes, it had been established by a Ms. Genevieve Omont, and yes, there were no conditions attached other than that Clifton use the funds for the purpose described. "Who is she?" Clifton asked. There was a brief pause on the other end. "Miss Omont is the principal shareholder and former CEO of Omont Capital Holdings," Dorothy said. "She stepped away from the company 18 months ago following a period of personal difficulty. She has recently resumed her role." Clifton sat down on the stool he kept behind the service counter. He sat there for a while. Here's what Genevieve Omont had not told him, because she was not a woman who led with her biography. Omont Capital Holdings was one of the largest privately held investment firms in Western Canada. Her father, René Omont, had built it over 40 years and left it to Genevieve when he died, along with the expectations that she would be twice as careful and twice as sharp as any of the men who would immediately begin trying to convince her she couldn't run it. For 15 years, she was not beloved in certain boardrooms. She was too direct for that, too uninterested in performance, but she was respected in the way that people respect something that actually works. Then her marriage ended. Then her father's former partner, a man named Aldrich Fournier, began a quiet campaign to destabilize her position at the company. It took him nearly 2 years, and he used everything available to him. Board relationships she hadn't maintained carefully enough. A restructuring she hadn't communicated well enough. A period of grief she hadn't been allowed to move through privately enough. He pushed her into a corner so gradually that by the time she saw the full shape of it, the vote was already scheduled. She resigned before they could push her out. She told herself it was strategic. She was not sure it was. The months that followed were the kind that don't have a clean narrative. She had money but not access to most of it. Fournier had moved fast and the legal untangling was slow. She had pride but not the energy to maintain the performance of being fine. She stayed in a motel. She stopped returning calls. She didn't eat well. She went to the hospital, not because she'd fallen exactly, but because she was standing in the parking lot of a grocery store one afternoon and realized she could not make herself go in, could not make herself do the next thing, and a security guard called 911 because she looked like someone who might not be okay. She wasn't. She was not okay. 4 days in hospital. Motel room gone when she got out. Garbage bag of belongings. February. Tim Hortons, and then a man named Clifton Adeyemi stopped his truck. He hadn't asked her who she was. He hadn't asked what had happened to her. He'd bought her soup and offered her a couch and let her be a person in a house with other people who were just living their lives. And something about that, the ordinariness of it, the Celestine making eggs without ceremony of it, the Imani asking questions without pity of it, had reached her in a place that no amount of professional support had been able to reach. She'd gone back to her lawyers from the fold-out couch, essentially. She'd made calls on a borrowed phone while Clifton was at work, quietly, methodically, in the way she did things when she was functioning. The legal case against Fournier was already underway. Her team had been building it without her, waiting for her to be ready. She was ready. Clifton did not know any of this when he opened that letter. What he found out over the weeks that followed came in pieces. Some from Dorothy, who was professionally circumspect but not cruel about withholding context. Some from the business news, which covered Genevieve's return to Omont Capital Holdings with the kind of coverage that suggested people had been waiting for it. Some from Genevieve herself, who called him once about a month later, on a Thursday evening. "I wanted to explain," she said. "You didn't have to," he said. "You didn't owe me an explanation. I know I didn't. I'm doing the shape of it. Not every detail. She wasn't a person who gave away every detail, but enough. The company, Fournier. The fall that wasn't quite a fall. The motel. She told it without self-pity and without drama, which made it hit harder than either of those things would have. The money," Clifton started, "is not charity," she said. "You said it yourself. It's a Tuesday." He laughed. He hadn't expected to. "I'm going to pay it back," he said. "When the business is running right, I'm going to pay it back. You don't have to. I know I don't. I'm doing it anyway." A pause on the line then, and he could hear that she meant it. Okay. The thing about Aldrich Fournier was that he was very good at appearing to have done nothing wrong. He had that particular talent, which some people in positions of power develop, of making a series of calculated moves look like a series of reasonable business decisions. The board members he'd cultivated over 2 years genuinely believed they were acting in the company's best interest. The restructuring narrative he'd shaped had been coherent enough that even people who liked Genevieve had nodded along. He'd been patient and he'd been thorough and he'd left very little obvious evidence. But Genevieve was also thorough. She'd spent 15 years learning how that company moved, who influenced whom, where the decisions actually got made versus where they got announced. She knew which emails to ask for and which meeting notes to cross-reference. Her legal team, led by a meticulous woman named Françoise Oulet, had spent 18 months constructing a case that didn't rely on any single dramatic document, because Fournier was too careful for that, but on a pattern of communications, a pattern of timing, a pattern of who had been told what and when and why it served Fournier's interests that they'd been told it then. The case didn't go to trial. It didn't need to. When Françoise presented the full scope of the documentation to Fournier's legal team in a meeting that lasted 4 hours, there was a long silence, and then they asked for a recess, and when they came back, Fournier had decided to explore retirement. He was 71. It was framed as a natural transition. Genevieve was reinstated with a board that had been reminded, in precise legal terms, of how the previous 2 years had actually unfolded. 3 board members resigned. 2 new ones were appointed. The company's communications team issued a statement about renewed leadership and strategic vision. Fournier gave a brief quote about being proud of the legacy he was leaving. She did not comment on any of it publicly. She went back to work. The Edmonton Oilers did not win the cup that year, which disappointed Imani considerably. She had developed, over the winter, a complicated relationship with the sport she'd previously described as confusing, which Clifton blamed entirely on Genevieve, who had sent Imani a signed jersey with a note that said, "You don't have to understand a thing to love it. That's the whole point." Imani had put the note on her bulletin board. Celestine, for her part, said she'd known from the beginning. Known what? Clifton asked. That there was something to that woman, Celestine said, with the tone of someone who does not feel the need to elaborate because the point is obvious. You could see it. She was down, but she wasn't lost. I just saw someone in a thin coat, Clifton said. That's why I let her stay, Celestine said. Because you just saw someone in a thin coat. Adeyemi Auto opened under full ownership in May. It was not a grand opening. Clifton wasn't a grand opening kind of person. But Imani drew a sign for the window that said under new old management, and Celestine brought Palau, and they had a small gathering of the regulars who'd been coming in for years. A card came from Genevieve, handwritten. It said, "Keep the lights on. Don't sell the soul of the place. You built this before you owned it." He framed it. He put it behind the service counter above the coffee maker, where he'd see it every morning. There's something people get wrong about stories like this one. They hear, man helps stranger, stranger turns out to be rich, stranger helps man back, and they think the story is about the reward, the transaction, the karmic accounting. Like the lesson is, be good to people because you might get something from it. But that's not what happened here. What happened was simpler and harder than that. Clifton stopped because she needed someone to stop. He didn't know who she was, he didn't ask. He had nothing to offer except a Tuesday and a couch and a family that treats people like people. And Genevieve, who had spent 18 months in a kind of exile that no amount of money could have fixed. Found her way back in part because someone saw her not as a fallen billionaire or a case to manage or a symbol of anything, but as a woman outside a Tim Hortons who looked like she could use some soup. The money mattered. Of course it did. Clifton isn't going to pretend it didn't change things. But what changed first was something the money couldn't buy. Ask yourself, honestly, if you'd been driving home that February night down that Edmonton road, exhausted and behind on rent and with a daughter waiting at home, what would you have done? Because the easiest thing in the world is to keep driving. Clifton Adeyemi didn't, and he'll tell you, if you ask him, that the easiest thing and the right thing almost never park in the same spot.